Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. To be honest, I didn't think I was going to make another one of these so soon. In fact, I haven't even been seeing YouTube ads at all recently because I just used my 1-month free trial of YouTube Premium so I could download videos for a long flight. But then, rather than paying the company that pays me on occasion, I decided I'd rather return to the bleak, chaotic hellscape of YouTube ads. And shortly after making that fateful decision, I was met with an advertisement so shocking that I had to put my other video plans on hold until I made this one. But let's take a step back real quick before we get into it. If this is your first time watching the series, welcome, glad you're here. You're about to see me play a series of games that YouTube advertised to me, excluding anything that will get me demonetized. I will play every game for at least an hour, and for the more complicated games, I'll try to give them 2 or 3. Who knows, maybe something will be fun enough that I will actually want to play for longer, but 2 episodes into this series, that has yet to happen. I will then give a review score out of 10 based on my time with the game. Remember, these aren't full review scores, so for longer games, don't take my rating as gospel, and trust me, that will be especially applicable this time around. So what ad did I see that scrambled my eggs so hard that I had to fast track this video? Well, as some of you might recall, in the first video I played a game called Last War Survival, which was an experience so tedious and bland that its players seemed to enjoy asking each other for explicit photos more than playing the game. Worse yet, the ads for the game were totally different from the real thing, and to many, the gameplay from those misleading ads looked more fun than the actual game. Well, our friends over at First Fun are back at it with another ad campaign featuring Antony Starr, better known as Homelander from The Boys. While that is strange enough on its own, it was the content of the ad itself that really knocked my socks off.
Stupid game isn't real.
It's called Last War. It's going viral because the developers made a real game based off the fake game in the ads.
That's right, First Fun pulled the ultimate Uno reverse card and is claiming that the fake game from the first ad campaign is now the real game. When I saw that, I decided it was time to once again put on my digital hazmat suit and see for myself. So, without further delay, let's have a look at the new Last War Survival. Shockingly, they kind of kept their word. The new gameplay does more closely resemble the original ads in that there are upgrades like more soldiers and better weapons that you can get by shooting barrels. That alone was a step up from the previous iteration of Last War, although I did notice the game fell to number 2 in the strategy category on the App Store since I played last time, so clearly things aren't looking good and the company is going bankrupt after giving all their money to Homelander, who, by the way, does not appear anywhere in the game besides the intro screen as far as I can tell. After beating the first stage and being convinced that Last War had turned a new leaf, things took a turn for the worse as I was greeted with the same dreadful base building that made the game so tedious in the first place. This element of Last War completely counteracts whatever mindless fun is to be had in the battles and forces you to spend time on the most lifeless, dull, needlessly overstimulating base building I've ever seen. But I was determined to make it farther into Last War than I did last time, so I forged ahead and decided my goal was to fight this big executioner boss guy. Let me tell you, for a game that clearly uses AI for its characters and voices, this boss felt like it desperately needed more AI. He basically made no effort to hurt me, and while I appreciate that I can now drive in any direction during boss battles, which is a new feature, I really didn't need to do that to evade anything, and any approach other than taking my thumb off the phone completely would have worked just fine. But even with that statement, I'm actually giving Last War too much credit, because I actually tried beating a level without touching the screen just to see what would happen, and here's how it went. It's not all bad, though. They did make the unlock process for new heroes progression-based rather than completely luck-based, which I liked. Granted, you still have to roll for heroes, but they give you the first few based on how many levels you complete rather than making it seem like random chance when it clearly wasn't. The in-game chat was also a lot less scandalous this time, thankfully, and there were even people giving out some genuinely good life advice. Overall, though, the new Last War is the old Last War, with a few very, very minor upgrades, and although it was slightly less excruciating this time around, this game still sucks. But hey, I'll be back when they do their ad campaign with Dean Norris. 2 out of 10. Next, we have our first quote-unquote real game in this batch with Once Human, just like me before I started this series. I alluded to this in the intro, but I just want to reiterate, for long-form games like this, I try to develop my score based on what I personally experienced, plus some reviews to round out my opinion and fill in the gaps. Still, I won't have the perspective of someone who has double or even triple-digit hours on the game, so keep that in mind. The first thing about Once Human that struck me is its imagery. The game has a cool Stranger Things meets Death Stranding aesthetic, especially in the opening, which also featured a character creator that I used to honor my favorite character from Last War Survival. For those unfamiliar, Once Human is a free-to-play, AAA, eat a souffle, Michael Bublé open-world survival game with a sprinkling of RPG elements, and I think it is pretty alright. Don't get me wrong, it is leagues better than pretty much every other game I have played for this series, but as those of you who have seen the other two videos know, that isn't saying much. The next thing I noticed about Once Human is that its story is unintelligible, to the point where it became distracting. I know the bar for video game stories has never been sky high, and I have definitely developed a high tolerance for sci-fi nonsense words over time, but even in that context, this was egregious, and it got immersion breaking when NPCs were constantly dropping lines like, "I'm reading ion spikes from the dream dimension. If another deviation crosses the phase barrier, we're at risk of total discombobulation." I know that sounds like hyperbole, but just listen to this for a second.
Deviations can be very dangerous if not taken care of. They can radiate stardust, which can lead to all kinds of unpredictable consequences.
Okay.
This is why we created the Mayflies. We make cradles and securement units to keep deviations contained.
On the gameplay side, Once Human is certifiably acceptable, and as someone who doesn't care for survival games, that's a pretty strong endorsement. The combat is shallow, but presented well enough to not get boring, although I definitely think they could have done more with it mechanically. For example, in the tutorial there was a zombie with a briefcase for a head, and after I killed it, I picked up the briefcase and fired energy balls at other zombies with it. That was the highlight of my time with the game, and I was really disappointed to not see anything that novel or engaging in the open world. On a more positive note, I really appreciated that the survival mechanics in Once Human weren't too punishing. I didn't constantly have to put whatever I was doing on pause to go chop down a tree or boil some water, which kept the pace of the game in a good spot. Of course, I didn't escape the inherent tedium that comes with the genre completely, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes when I had to find scrap metal so I could build the furnace, which allowed me to build the disassembly bench, which allowed me to build the gear table, which allowed me to build the supply table, which allowed me to craft ammo. But I am fully aware that things like that might not be as grating for others, and when I asked the global chat how they felt about the game, what I got back was almost entirely positive. In terms of atmosphere, Once Human is oddly inconsistent. For the most part, the map feels like an incredibly generic open world that you could easily mistake for that of PUBG or Days Gone or any number of similar games. But in those occasional moments where the presentation of the environment matches the haunting enemy designs, Once Human's aesthetic shines. I just wish it did that more often. Speaking of enemy designs, I think those are probably Once Human's strongest visual element. And to me, the game is at its best when you're in some fog-covered neighborhood weaving through mobs of interdimensional undead. Unfortunately, I can't say the enemies make as positive an impact on gameplay as they do on visuals, though. The AI for these guys is just really, really underwhelming. A lot of enemies just let me wail on them and barely fought back, and the one big boss I did was utterly flummoxed by the fact that I could hide behind a truck. In my view, Once Human is a decent survival game that has potential to become a genre frontrunner if the developers can sand off the rough edges and inject some much-needed inspiration into the open world and moment-to-moment gameplay. If you're a fan of the genre, I'd recommend checking this one out, but otherwise, I can't see why someone would choose this over the other games out there. 6 out of 10. Look guys, I get it. You're not here to see me review mildly enjoyable open world survival games. You're here to see me go dumpster diving into the lowest depths this medium can reach, and unfortunately for me, your wish was granted. I knew things would be spicy when the ad I got for Ancient Seal the Exorcist showed what appeared to be a modded version of the Godfrey boss fight from Elden Ring with some crappy mobile game UI superimposed onto it. That already made me relatively certain this would not be a pleasant hour, but little did I know that my opinion of Ancient Seal would only plummet from there.
Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
I would try to summarize what this game is for you, but honestly I can't, because the game itself did not extend me that courtesy when I started playing it. When you boot up Ancient Seal, there's no fanfare, no intro cinematic, no tutorial, no nothing. You just choose a character and get told to go find Ao Bing. I don't know who Ao Bing is. Better yet, I don't know who I am. I then struggled for several minutes to free Ao Bing from a giant cloister when I accidentally clicked on the quest objective text. In doing so, I turned on autoplay, which just plays the game for you, straight up. I have jokingly said in the past that some games play themselves, but in this case it is completely true. Your items equip themselves, your character moves on their own, they talk to NPCs on their own, and they fight on their own. Before I even knew what this game was, I was already beating level 30 bosses. The autoplay feature essentially turns Ancient Seal into a Cocomelon baby sensory video for Eastern RPG fans, and after I discovered the feature, I basically didn't touch the screen again until my hour was up, mainly because I had no idea what was happening. Earlier in this video, I described Last War Survival as needlessly overstimulating. After playing Ancient Seal, I can safely say that statement is an insult to both Last War and stimulation as a concept. I'll admit it, I have a hard time doing things without stimulation. It's a problem, I recognize it. But Ancient Seal made me, a guy who struggles to brush his teeth without a video on in the background, want to throw my phone into an erupting volcano so my brain could rest. There is so much going on in Ancient Seal that it almost feels as though it is designed not to be processed. By the time your brain is beginning to form an understanding of what's going on, 4 more equally baffling things are introduced. It is beyond exhausting to play or look at, and I had to cut off my first session after only 20 minutes because I had a pounding headache. By the way, in that time, apparently my character had reached level 45. My next session with Ancient Seal went much the same way, as I soldiered on until signing up for the paid VIP subscription was presented as a mandatory quest objective. And because you complete a quest objective every 20 seconds, naturally I clicked on it without a second thought since the game had turned my mind into soggy mush. Thankfully, I did seem to be able to back out, but honestly, I'm still not sure I did. That was the last straw for Ancient Seal the Exorcist, and I stopped playing at that point. It's hard to summarize my experience with this game because there's nothing to understand about it. Playing it, or more accurately, watching it, is like being thrown into a hurricane of bad voice acting,
Skills! That little white dragon behind you!
UI clutter, non-gameplay, and complete sensory overload. The most charitable way I could describe Ancient Seal is that it is one very long cutscene, and that cutscene is atrocious. There are no redeeming qualities about this game, and even if there were, those would be immediately erased by the advertising's blatant theft of assets from other, far more enjoyable games. This isn't just the worst game I have played for this series. Ancient Seal the Exorcist is the worst game I have ever played, period, and deleting it from my phone made me feel like I had been exorcised. Our first ever 0 out of 10. After playing Ancient Seal, I was craving something a little more low-key, and thankfully that's exactly what I was promised in the ad I got for The Tower, a relaxing AFK tower defense game. But after playing it for an hour, I wouldn't exactly call The Tower relaxing. To me, it's just boring. In a sharp contrast to Ancient Seal, The Tower's presentation is pretty bare bones, and I think games like Geometry Wars have shown how to make this sort of look way more visually pleasing. The gameplay also does little to excite or engage the player, and I get that's sort of the point. Reviews for the game mentioned how runs can last for literally thousands of rounds, although my best were barely cracking double digits. This is my main problem with the tower. The progression, both within the game and at a meta level, is extremely slow. I played for an hour, and by the end of that period I was already fully steeped in the grind, with my next major upgrade dozens of runs away. Because each run is supposed to last for such a long time, upgrades within them also do very little. For example, this is what a range upgrade looks like in the tower. If you think that's bad, how about this upgrade that added 8 1,000ths damage to my attack? But just when I thought I had the tower all figured out, they pulled out the big guns. Since the tower is so boring, they give you the opportunity to play other awesome games within the game by showing you ads. Watching ads earns you gems, which you can use to get cards, which can augment your tower significantly. Like this demon mode power-up I got that gives my tower goofy-ass wings and an overshield. I'm basically out of things to say about this game, so why don't we do a quick lightning round of some of the other fantastic titles I got to sample while playing the tower. Whiteout Survival has quick, snappy progression, but I don't think people would be this excited to eat polar bear steaks, so the narrative team has some work to do here. Plus, there were no ads for other mobile games that I could play within Whiteout Survival, so that's a big drawback. 1 out of 10 for the Whiteout Survival game within the game The Tower. The Pokemon TCG ad gave me a nice looking Arcanine in my very first pack, and that just felt good. What can I say? 10 out of 10 for the Pokemon TCG ad. Now for the second Pokemon TCG ad, I got the exact same cards from the first pack, and that's just unacceptable. I can't even stomach the thought of playing the ad for a third time. I feel scammed and betrayed. 0 out of 10. Slime Castle is another AFK tower defense, and honestly this was more fun and better looking than the tower, which is the game I was currently playing. 4 out of 10 for the Slime Castle ad. Finally, Backpack Brawl made literally 0 sense at all, but I got more gems for playing it than I got for playing the tower. 2 out of 10. Alright, I've been pretty hard on this game so far, but I will say there was at least some amount of strategy that went into buying the upgrades. For example, spending money on damage in the early rounds isn't that valuable because you one-shot everything anyway, so you're better served going for something like a cash multiplier or fire rate boost. While I don't love the presentation, the concept itself isn't awful, and after playing Ancient Seal, I know things could be so much worse. 3 out of 10. Well, that brings us neatly along to our closer, Throne and Liberty, aka Bilbo Baggins' Age the Veilguard, Amazon's new MMO and latest attempt to prove that they can win our affections by throwing enough money at something. If I had to distill my feelings on Throne and Liberty down to one word, that word would be mixed. For everything the game does right, it does something of equal importance wrong. For example, the game looks great in the opening and I was genuinely impressed by the production values, but then just a few cutscenes later, the game looks like this. Combat is in a similar spot. They introduce a parry mechanic right away, which I liked, but then it quickly takes a backseat to very standard, clunky MMO combat. The environments are visually stunning, but they don't seem to offer much in terms of exploration, even when the answers are staring them in the face. I spent a good deal of time exploring this coastal area filled with shipwrecks, and even though the intro to the area mentions lost treasures, I found literally nothing. Even these cool crab enemies who have treasure chests on their back didn't drop anything. The quest design is another area where the game struggles, and of the 20 to 25 quest objectives I completed, the majority of them were as boring and straightforward as go here, talk to this person, go there, talk to that person. As for the story, well, I can't really say anything positive about that either. The dialogue is so bland that I could barely pay enough attention to piece anything together, but I do remember them mentioning something about star fragments once or twice.
Star fragment.
Star fragment. Star fragment. Star fragment.
Of a star fragment.
Star fragment.
Of a star fragment. Star fragment.
Star fragment. Star fragments.
Star fragment.
Star fragment. Star fragment. Star fragments. I believe.
Getting a little tired of hearing about star fragments.
It could be worse, I guess. At least it wasn't a Genshin situation where some annoying NPC with a high-pitched voice follows you around for the whole game.
Oh my god. Helpy? Was that like the first idea that came into your head? We couldn't have pitched a little longer on Helpy?
Helpy aside, there were things about Throne and Liberty that I liked. The game runs fantastically, and considering how high quality the graphics are and how badly so many PC games run, that is a serious accomplishment. I know Throne and Liberty started out as a mobile game, so the developers likely had to be laser focused on optimization, which is a really nice thing for those of us who are on the lower end of the PC performance spectrum. I mean, just look at how smooth fast traveling is. I also want to spend another moment giving some love to the environment design in this game. During the big flashy flyover cinematic, the game shows off a host of visually distinct, exciting looking areas that spurred my sense of adventure and made me want to spend time exploring. Although, if my experience with Shipwreck Beach was any indication, I don't have much faith the game would reward my curiosity with anything meaningful. Of course, my impression of Throne and Liberty is just the tip of the iceberg, since in MMOs, the story campaign is merely an appetizer compared to the endgame, which is where the meat of the experience lies. Based on what I learned from Steam reviews and reviews from other gaming channels, Throne and Liberty's endgame is tainted by its mobile game heritage and is pay to win, cut and dry. In SkillUp's review, the reviewer mentions that grinding a single piece of endgame gear without spending money would take well over a month of playing daily for several hours. The game also features multiple battle passes and a currency that limits how often you can complete dungeons, and the only workaround, of course, is spending money for more of that currency. In case that didn't sound bad enough, you can also just cut out the middleman entirely and buy good gear with money.
I've acquired this, I've acquired this, I've acquired this, I've acquired this, okay? So that's what I've gotten with real money. I can tell you what else I've gotten with real money. If you look at the sword, you'll see hit chance 80, heavy attack chance 80, critical hit chance 80. I also acquired that with real money.
All of this combines for an experience that is very, as I said at the beginning, mixed. Throne and Liberty looks good, feels decent, has nice biomes, and runs incredibly well, but is held back by uninspired quest design, cringeworthy story, and, based on the testimony of others, pay-to-win monetization in the endgame. Ultimately, Throne and Liberty screams average from the mountaintops and lands squarely in the middle for me. 5 out of 10. And so concludes the third installment of Playing Every Game YouTube Advertises to me. I need a nap, and maybe a drink. As usual, if you're a big fan of any of the games I covered, or just want to join in on the discussion, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, I appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next one.